I started back thinking the other day, like since about 2007, when the Boston Celtics did it, every team is kind of like tried to picture their teams and having a big three. Well, guess what? The Memphis Grizzlies is currently constructed. They have a big three. And not one of those two and a half, two guys and a guy you expect to take a leap or something like that. They have a legitimate big three. I'm going to tell you why coming up on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal right here in Memphis, Tennessee. That's right, I'm in Memphis, Tennessee right now. Did not take the rest of the road trip out to Denver and LA, but I'll be here in Memphis for the rest of the week, including for Sunday's game against the Sacramento Kings. But thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies with us each and every day. Make sure you continue to like, comment, rate, subscribe anywhere and everywhere you're viewing Locked On Grizzlies. We're available on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. Wherever you get it, your podcast, Locked On Grizzlies, is there. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code in all lowercase Locked On NBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. We got a lot to talk about on today's show. If you're tuning in on YouTube, then you see it over there on our big screen. If you're not, well, to break it down to you, here's how the show will go today. We're going to talk about the Memphis Grizzlies entering their big three era, more smart adjustments the Grizzlies should make. In the second segment, we're going to talk about how the Grizzlies continue to get Marcus Smart acclimated as he continues to grow in his new role with the team. And then in our last segment, we're going to preview tonight's game between the Denver Nuggets and the Memphis Grizzlies. Another game that's going to be kind of a tone-setting game for the Grizzlies going forward. So all of that in today's show. But first and foremost, we got to start with the idea of this whole big three thing. Now, before I get into the Grizzlies' point of this, I always like to kind of bring it back full picture. If you look around the league right now, a lot of teams can say, oh, yeah, we got a big three. And usually when you get to like the third person, it's a little iffy, right? That's kind of how it goes, in this league. And I mean, I'm just going to go to some of the top teams in the NBA right now. And I think there are ones who certainly you can make a strong argument for that have, big threes. But there are some others where it's like, sure. For example, the Boston Celtics, top team in the Eastern Conference right now, right? With the Boston Celtics, Jason Tatum, Jalen Brown, all-star players. Then you got Kristaps Porzingis, you got I think that's their big three, but then you got Derek White, you got Drew Holiday. I mean, they got like a big five. They're in a completely different category. But you go through the league, you got the Bucks, right? The Bucks got Giannis, and the Bucks got Damian Lillard. That's a big two. Now, it gets iffy when you talk about the big three part for them because Brook Lopez in his role, just really solid role player. Chris Middleton, injuries have kind of taken a toll as of late, not playing at that all-star level that he used to play. So they're kind of like a big two, but they have really solid pieces around it. Same thing with the Philadelphia 76ers, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey. Then you got solid pieces around them. You got Tobias Harris. You got DeAnthony Melton, who's very former Grizzlies fans. And then you go to the Western Conference, kind of similar. The Thunder. You got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Chet Holmgren is growing into that nice role. But then you got guys like Jalen Williams. You got nice pieces. Lou Dort over there and whatnot. Sacramento Kings, De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monks, etc. The point that I'm making is to have a big three in today's NBA usually means you don't have depth. And the Grizzlies are positioned to be able to have both if they play the cards right. Because all three of their players, Desmond Bane, John Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., are homegrown talents. Homegrown meaning that they were drafted by the Memphis Grizzlies. That has allowed the Grizzlies to put people like Marcus Smart for example, around them while Desmond Bane was on his rookie contract, and others around them while Jaren Jackson Jr. or even, Ja Morant were on their rookie contracts before their second deals eventually kicked in. The Grizzlies have a legitimate big three. I think there's no argument with Ja Morant. You can make a small argument with Jaren Jackson Jr., but at the end of the day, he's an all-star. So that puts him in the category. He's a former defensive player of the year. I think that puts him in the category because I say the Minnesota Timberwolves have a big three, and you have Anthony Edwards, you have Karl Anthony Towns, who are the two duds, and then Rudy Gobert, who looks like probably the best defensive player on the planet right now. That's a legitimate big three. So I think you make the same case in Memphis. Desmond Bane is the one that moves the needle. We've had this whole talk about, is Desmond Bane going to be an all-star this year and all that. And actually, I think his case is growing as Ja Morant kind of, leads the Grizzlies to new heights. I think that's helping his case because you can't have it both ways here. You can't say, oh, the Grizzlies are only winning because Ja's back, and then before Ja came back, you can say, oh, Desmond Bane is putting up empty stats. Because guess what? Desmond Bane is averaging close to he's averaging around 28, 29 points a game right now, which is more than he was before Ja Morant got back. And I'm saying he's averaging that over the last 4-game stretch, over 25 for the season. But the point is, Desmond Bane hasn't lost anything. He's still very aggressive. Jaren Jackson Jr., same thing. In the 4 games, first 3 games, over 20 points. In the last game, 19 points. And here's what makes the Grizzlies' big three kind of work to me. It's why it's a big three. One of the big reasons why it's a big three. And I'm about to play off of the points that I just said. Ja Morant and Desmond Bane, the stats have shown that those two have played well off of each other for years. Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. have played well off of each other. The one duo where it's been like, it's been Ja and Jaren. We've seen it in the past when Ja's been out. Jaren has taken his game to another level. Then they get back, and it hasn't looked as pretty. And you say, well, why is that? We finally figured it out. It took a long time. I mean, Jaren's in year 6, Ja's in year 5. But we finally have the answers, like legitimately. And it took Ja being suspended for 25 games to get this data. And it's simple. Jaren Jackson Jr. is one of the best isolation players in the NBA. And Ja Morant has the ball in his hands when he's on the floor a lot. So here's the thing. The Grizzlies are learning to say, hey, Jaren, you got the mismatch. Remember that Pelicans game, overtime? The Pelicans sub Zion Williamson out of the game. They bring in Dyson Daniels, real stout defender, but too little for Jaren Jackson Jr. And Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, those guys gave the ball to Jaren Jackson Jr., and they got out of the way. 2 points, easy. Grizzlies take 4-point lead, and that was the game. That was the ball game. My point is, Ja has figured it out. Jaren has figured it out. Ja even told me, he said, yeah, I want him to stay aggressive. Jaren Jackson Jr. said the same thing. I have to stay aggressive now that Ja's back. The reason the Grizzlies have a legitimate big three isn't just because they have 3 powwow names. It's not just because all 3 of these guys can put up big numbers. It's because they're all starting to show that they can do it while each other are on the floor, and the results, the proof's in the pudding. The Grizzlies are 7-0 historically when all 3 of those guys score at least 20 points. 7-0. 3-0 this season already. And in the 4th game of the season, Jaren scored 19 points. So he was 1 point away from doing that again. And that was something that Jaren actually pointed out to me. I think we were in Atlanta. We were talking about this whole big three thing, like how these guys have looked. I think Desmond Bane told me, he was like, hey, it's pick your poison out there. But Jaren basically said, alluding to, the stat about each of them scoring 20 or more points, the Grizzlies being undefeated. Jaren said, yeah, and going back to how well they play off of each other, he said they're basically going to be nights where that doesn't happen, but the numbers will kind of equal up to that. He said there have been times in the past where, like Ja and Des will score 30 plus, and he'll score a little bit less, and somehow it'll equal up to those guys scoring, 65 plus points together in some way, shape, or form. So the point is, the Grizzlies have a big three because they're starting to play off of each other. The difference last season was the Jaren combo. You think about the weaknesses in Jaren Jackson Jr.'s game. For example, he's not really flourished as a roller to the rim. You don't see Jaren Jackson Jr. and coming off pick and roll situations with Morant and there being alley oops and hard dives to the rim and things like that. It's a lot of pick and pop. It's a lot of isolation. Like, the Grizzlies and John and Jaren have finally figured out how to work those guys alongside of each other. And it's not just helping them, it's helping the players around them as well. And speaking of the players around them, we got to talk about one of those guys in our next segment. That's Marcus Smart. He's one game in. There's still more adjustments that need to be made, even though the results were good in game one. We're going to talk about that next on Locked On Grizzlies. But before we get to that, we got to talk with our friends over there at eBay Motors, because eBay Motors is where you go to build your vision part by part. And I always say the same thing about eBay Motors. Our partners over at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd. And the idea is to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. For the people playing fantasy out there, make sure you're listening to this part of the show, because whether you're prepping for a daily draft or you're just scouting the waiver wire every week, we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. Early this week, our player was Isaiah Hartenstein, and now our eBay Motors best fit fantasy pick of the week is Jaden Ivey. Look, I know he's playing the Boston Celtics. I'm very well aware of, the Pistons playing the Celtics tonight, and it's probably not going to be pretty. But Jaden Ivey, Monty Williams has finally given him minutes, and Ivey has delivered. He has the athleticism. I mean, it's his quickness, his how fast he is with the ball reminds me of John Morant in those ways. Body control and other things like that are things he has to grow in. But it remains to be seen if Williams is going to keep that role consistent. But our host, Josh Lloyd, likes Jaden Ivey and what he's been doing. So Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. And guess what? It's the same way with your vehicle. It is the same way with your vehicles, with over 122 million parts for your number one vehicle. It's simple. I mean, this is the place for you to go to if you want your ride to ride smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your car, your vehicle needs, eBay Motor has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride for the first time, every time, or you just get your money back. I mean, it's not too much offers better out there. And at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your vehicle going alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, and exclusions apply. Coming up on Locked On Grizzlies, we got to talk about Marcus Smart and the continued adjustments that the Grizzlies should make. Stay tuned for that. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, everyone. I am Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal here in Memphis, Tennessee. Thank you guys for tuning in with us on today's show. Make sure you continue to tune in with us. Shout out to our everydayers out there. Shout out to the people who've grown to Locked On Grizzlies as of late. I hope you're enjoying the show. We got some cool things planned for you guys going forward. So make sure you stay tuned and continue to tune in with us. But on today's episode, we just talked about the Grizzlies entering their big three era, right? There's a legitimate big three in Memphis between not Marcus Smart. We'll talk about him in a second. Between John Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. And that is a trio that the Grizzlies can continue to build around. And one of the ways you build around a big three is I think you have to have a fourth player who is very, very solid. Think about back to the Celtics big three, since we're talking about that big three a lot. That big three had Ray Allen. They had Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett. We're talking about 2007, 2008. That fourth player for them was Rajon Rondo, the point guard. He kind of orchestrated things over there. Think back to when the Miami Heat won their last NBA title, right? LeBron James, yes. Dwayne Wade, of course. Chris Bosh, of course. That fourth player on that team was Ray Allen for them. You go back even further than that. You go back even more recent. Every team you can think of that's won, that's had those kind of big threes. It's always been that fourth player who's been really solid. And right now, looks like that player is going to have to be Marcus Smart for the Grizzlies. Marcus Smart's going to have to be that guy. Before the injuries and whatnot, I would have probably leaned to say Steven Adams, because Steven Adams' rebounding is game changer, as we've seen since he's been out. But you can make an argument that Marcus Smart, Steven Adams, pick your poison, whatever the case may be. But since we're talking about the smart adjustments here that need to be made, if you go in that first game, again, we touched on it. The second quarter was terrible for the Grizzlies. And this wasn't just a one-game thing. The Grizzlies have the worst net rating in the NBA in the second quarter. They have the worst plus-minus, and it's by a lot. It's nearly twice as bad plus-minus-wise as the Detroit Pistons, who are 29th in the NBA, in plus-minus in the second quarter. So the Grizzlies are struggling a lot in the second quarter, and people have been asking me, what's the reason? Well, the number one reason is depth. Because the second quarter of all quarters, the second quarter is where it is exposed the most that the Grizzlies missed on their Jake LaRavia pick. It's where it's exposed the most that Zaire Williams was a top 10 pick, and he doesn't look like a top 10 pick. It's where it's exposed the most that David Roddy is giving you flashes of good play, but it hasn't been consistent enough. The Grizzlies hit on 1, 2, or all three of those picks, then we're not having this conversation. We're having this conversation because depth is the reason that the second quarter is hard. Well, you say, well, guess what? The team makes the same adjustments in the third quarter. Well, not necessarily. If you've been following Taylor Jenkins, you've been following the Grizzlies a lot. I like to say that sometimes Memphis likes to deploy what I call a 9.5-man rotation. He'll play 10 some nights. He'll play 9 some nights. But the first half is usually the fill out. They play 10 guys typically in the first half. That 10th player, depending on how he plays in the first half, determines if A, Taylor Jenkins streaks the rotation in the second half, or B, he keeps that 10th player, in the rotation, depending on if he plays well. So with that being said, the Grizzlies usually play 9 in the second half because in the first half, the second quarters have been really bad. But one way to help fix these second quarters is the return of Marcus Smart. How I think the Grizzlies will use this thing going forward, I think Marcus Smart is a guy you'll see on the floor more of with Ja Morant. We saw that in this first game that Marcus Smart got back, and we've talked about in the past how Ja Morant, now that he's been fully incorporated, we've seen that Ja Morant has started the game with the starters, of course, and Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. usually stay in the game while Ja exits in the first quarter around the midway point. Around the 6-minute mark, Ja Morant exits the game. Then around 1 or 2 minutes left in the first quarter, Ja Morant comes back, and he starts the second quarter pretty much with a full bench unit. Usually it's guys like John Conchar, Zaire Williams, Xavier Tillman, Santi Aldama. You get a couple shooters around him, a lot of defenders, and it's basically a lineup that's out there deployed for Ja Morant to cook. Well, guess what? All the players that I just mentioned play alongside of Ja Morant. None of them are really known as playmakers, and that kind of was exposed in the first half of the last game against the Pelicans. Ja Morant pretty much, was in his same aggressive attack mode. But what we noticed was the Pelicans packed the paint to a T. And that made it tough on Morant to get to his scoring spot because Santi Aldama was 0-2 on three-pointers. He was the guy who we talked about guys who were phased out of rotation in the second half typically. He was the guy in that last game against the Pelicans who ended up not receiving much playing time in that second half. So they packed the paint. And the ball stuck in Ja Morant's hands a lot. And Ja even told me recently that he has to get off the ball a little bit more. Basically, stop, dribbling, pick and roll a little bit more. Allow other guys to do their thing a little bit more too. He is conscious and aware of that. So we'll see how that continues to play out. But it's more noticeable with the second unit because they don't have as many creators. That's where Marcus Smart comes into play. That first game, you could see Marcus Smart kind of just, being in the shadows. In the second quarter, didn't have an assist, And I expect Marcus Smart, quite frankly, he shouldn't have another game this season where he has 0 assists throughout an entire first half of basketball. Shouldn't happen again this season. It happened in this game, and Marcus Smart basically was in the corners, spot up shooter, took three-point attempts, I think, in the first half. But the big adjustment here is when he's on the floor with Morant can get off the ball some. If teams follow the Pelicans method, they're going to load up the paint. They're going to say, Morant, come to us. And you're going to need guys like Marcus Smart who can find Morant in other situations. That's kind of why they brought him in, right? Not just for his ability to play a backup point guard role when Ja's out of the game, but his ability to be a secondary playmaker. The same thing that we're seeing out of Desmond Bane, who's averaging over 5 assists per game this season. You need Marcus Smart to be that secondary playmaker. That's the big adjustment I want to see, not only in this game against the Denver Nuggets, but against all the games going forward. He has the ability to be that type of player. He's been that type of player playing alongside of guys like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So why not do it in Memphis? It's going to make the job easier for Ja Morant when they go to those lineups where those two guys are playing mostly with the bench. So hopefully Taylor Jenkins sticks with it. I think in the third quarter, especially in the fourth quarter, we saw better results with that Ja Morant and Marcus Smart pairing playing alongside the bench. It didn't go well in the first half. The last time the Grizzlies had a similar adjustment was when Desmond Bane started that first game that Ja Morant returned. He played with the bench unit starting the second quarter in that game, and the Pelicans went on a 28-2 run. Next game, Taylor Jenkins says, we're going to swap Bane for Ja. It worked out pretty well. Now you got to take the step to take that adjustment to the next level. Marcus Smart continued to groom him in that role of playing alongside of Ja Morant in the secondary playmaking role. And I think that unit, because I'm not worried about the Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. Pairing as they play alongside of other pieces, especially when Derrick Rose and some other guys can continue to come back, Luke Kennard as well. So all things basically point to me believing that Marcus Smart should be paired with Ja Morant, which is kind of not what we thought at the beginning of the season, right? We always thought that those two guys would be staggered, but here we are. That's why you let these things play out. A big reason why it's working is because Desmond Bane is taking a jump as a playmaker, and he looks like he can hold his own in that role. The Grizzlies will need Desmond Bane to hold his own. They'll probably need a few more players to hold their own as they take on the Denver Nuggets on today. We got to talk about that matchup coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies. But before we talk about the matchup against the Denver Nuggets, we got to talk about our friends over at PrizePicks, because PrizePicks is where you go right now, and you can get a first deposit match of up to $100. PrizePicks is the number one daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It is the largest of them in North America as well. PrizePicks is easy and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's simple. It's just you against the numbers instead of battling thousands of other players, including the pros and the sharks. All you have to do is pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You say, Damichael, tell me a little bit more about PrizePicks. I know a couple of you have reached out to me, say, I've been on the fence about PrizePicks. Damichael, give me a little bit more information. Well, guess what? Basketball season here. Let's say you can do this. You can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. It's a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you can go out there and say LeBron James and Travis Kelce had a combo of 10.5 combination of 3-pointers made and receptions. Yeah, you can combine sports over here at PrizePicks. Not just that, PrizePicks offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So for football and basketball games, you have a player get hurt in the first quarter or the second quarter. Guess what? No sweat, man, because the player is rebooted from your PrizePicks more or less than projections. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with the injury insurance policy. It's the only one out there that gives you this opportunity. Well, how do you go take advantage of that? It's simple. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. Thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies. And coming up next on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to talk Denver Nuggets and Memphis Grizzlies preview. Stay tuned for that. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, everyone. I am Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal right here in Memphis, Tennessee. Appreciate you guys for tuning in with us on today. We've talked about the Grizzlies entering a true big three era right now. We talked about Marcus Smart. The one big adjustment I want to see. Let me know what you guys think as well. What are some of the adjustments you want to see from Marcus Smart and the Memphis Grizzlies going forward as he continues to kind of get incorporated back into the lineup here? Now we got to talk about the next challenge because it's a big one. Quite frankly, I think this is going to be the toughest opponent that the Grizzlies have played yet since Ja Morant has returned. Not just because of their record. The Denver Nuggets are the number 2 seed in the Western Conference at this time. But it's not just that. And, well, they're not the number 2 seed anymore because the Thunder won yesterday. But anyways, it's not just that. They are terrific at home. Denver is 12-2 playing on their home floor. I think one of those losses actually is to the Thunder. But you got to be a really good team to go into Ball Arena and to win. The Grizzlies have the pieces right now. I think we can agree that. But this game will be tough simply because, number one, let's start on the Grizzlies side here. Let's get that out of the way first. Ja Morant is questionable to play due to an illness. I think what will happen here is the Grizzlies will give him all day up to game time. They'll see how he's feeling. And as he progresses throughout the day, today will determine his availability. So right now, I think his availability is very much up in the air. This is something we've seen around the league, as you've gotten into, this season where a lot of teams, are dealing with, illnesses and things like that. We even seen it with the Grizzlies. I think we were in Houston when Desmond Bane missed his first game of the season down there. And if I remember, he didn't attend shoot around. And he was very much, sick, I think, throughout the day and didn't play in the first game. Then he ended up playing in the next game in Memphis after feeling, much better. So we'll see. It's different for everyone. And depending on, the severity of it, we'll see if Ja Morant is able to give it a go today. But that'll be decided pretty much close up to game time as he gets the day to go. So if Ja Morant plays, it's very obvious. The Grizzlies have one big advantage, and that's getting into the paint against this team. When a lot of teams, when you go to Ball Arena, I hear a lot of players say it usually takes a quarter or two to get adjusted to the altitude in Denver. And one of the ways that makes that adjustment a little bit easier is simply just get to the rim because you're going to be tired early on, and being tired leads to being short on jumpers and things like that. So getting to the rim, causing fouls. Ja Morant is probably the best at it right now, averaging over 20 paint points per game since he returned. You say 20 paint points. Yeah, those are like Shaq, prime Giannis, prime Shaq. Those are the players who put up those type of numbers. I think Ja Morant led the NBA a couple years ago and by averaging 16 and a half paint points per game. So for to be averaging 20 so far is extremely impressive. The Nuggets don't really have terrific rim protection from the standpoint of shot blockers. So I think Jokic doesn't get enough credit for his defensive ability as a guy who's very good in drop coverage, as a guy who's very good at securing defensive rebounds. He has great hands to get into passing lanes. He gets a lot of steals, but not really a shot blocker. Ja Morant, downhill Des, Jaren Jackson Jr. Is getting downhill a lot as well. I think those three guys are very primed to take advantage of that. Now, if Ja doesn't play, close your eyes. It's that simple. Close your eyes because it's going to be a tough. It's going to be a tough one. Now that's not saying that the Grizzlies can't win the game because defensively they'll at least be able to hang around. They should be able to. But Marcus Smart is getting readjusted right now, and one of the big part of that readjustment is he's playing off the ball much more than earlier in the season. We saw games where he played on the ball, off the ball. The Grizzlies was just mixing and matching it early in the season. And now it's kind of set in stone that off the ball in a secondary playmaking role is much better suited to get the best out of Marcus Smart than putting him in that primary playmaking role. So that's going to be a big part of it. Another big part of this game is the Denver Nuggets will be without Aaron Gordon. If you didn't see the recent news that the team and multiple other reporters put out there, is Aaron Gordon, was bit, by a dog recently. I think he required 21 stitches So wishing him, safe and well recoveries as he gets back, finds his way on the floor. But they're saying he's going to be away from the team for a little bit right now. So he got bit by a dog on Christmas Day after the Nuggets won their game. So no Aaron Gordon is big. And I think it's a two-way street here. Number one, I think this makes the challenge tougher on the Grizzlies to guard the Denver Nuggets. Damichael, what are you talking about? Well, just listen real quick. Here's the thing. The Denver Nuggets, with Jamal Murray, with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, with Michael Porter Jr., around Nikola Jokic, they have 3+ three-point shooters. 3 guys, if you leave them open, you're going to get burned. The one guy in that Nuggets starting lineup where you say we can sag off of him a little bit has been Aaron Gordon. If you watch Taylor Jenkins and how he likes to script his defenses a little bit at the start of games, you've noticed the constant with how the Grizzlies like to move around Jaren Jackson Jr. In this game, if Aaron Gordon was playing, Jaren Jackson Jr. would be guarding him, and he would be sagging off, daring him to shoot, because Aaron Gordon is shooting below 30% from three-point range this year, daring him to shoot and basically saying, I'm going to help out, with Jokic, with Bismack Biyombo. I'm going to help him. I'm going to help Xavier Tillman. I'm going to help out on drives. And we're going to dare Aaron Gordon to beat us. It's a strategy we've seen the Grizzlies do pretty much against any team that has that one subpar three-point shooter in the lineup. Taylor Jenkins likes to find that guy. Usually it's a wing player, and let Jaren Jackson Jr. operate as a roamer. Now, Denver, without Aaron Gordon in the lineup, they have options to add. For one, we don't know who's going to be, that next player that they're going to add in the lineup. And I was talking to some people, out there and say, who's going to be the guy? And it sounds like there are a couple options that the team could weigh. One of those options is the young kid over there in Peyton Watson. And Peyton Watson is 21, and he's shooting 34% from three-point range right now. Justin Holiday, the vet, the brother of Drew and Aaron Holiday, is another one, and he's shooting 47.4% from three-point range on 2.2 attempts per game right now. So those are 2 guys that come to mind as primary options for the Denver Nuggets. So from what I'm hearing, it sounds like Justin Holiday is going to be a guy that's trying to get that position. And if that's the case, you're going to have Nikola Jokic on the floor with a 47% three-point shooter, a 42% three-point shooter in Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, a 39.5% three-point shooter in Michael Porter Jr., and a 44.9% three-point shooter in Jamal Murray. Basically, 4 guys who can shoot over 40% from three-point range and Nikola Jokic. That's going to be tough to guard. That's going to be tough to guard, especially with the way that Jokic finds guys. Because when you're playing against Jokic, it's kind of become the thing right now. You got to choose one. You either let him be a scorer. You say, hey, we're going to guard him one-on-one, and we're going to stay attached to all these shooters. Or you say, we're going to help, and we're going to depend on our rotations to be very quick and crisp. And we're going to give up a couple open shots, but we got to hope guys miss. You pick your poison when you play the Denver Nuggets. I think in the game like this, you got to guard Jokic one-on-one. Of course, he's going to get 25, 30, and possibly even more. But Bismack Biyombo is a very solid defender. Xavier Tillman has had success in certain games against Jokic. Now, Jokic has also gotten the better of him, just like he does pretty much everybody. But Tillman if you go back to March of last season, Tillman has had success in the past, against Jokic in that matchup. He's very mobile to stay in front of him. He's strong enough to hold his own on the block when Jokic tries to back him up in the paint. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Biyombo and Tillman hold their own in that matchup, because that's what it's going to come down to. You got to choose. Again, you don't want Nikola Jokic to have a game where he has 30-plus points and 10-plus assists. You want to say, hey, he had 35 points, but he only had 6 assists. Or he only had 25 points. I mean, if he had 12 assists, he only had 25 points. You got to kind of pick and choose with that guy. And that's what happens when you're going against a guy who's won multiple MVPs and a finals MVP as well. So a big game for the Grizzlies. 4-0 since Ja Morant has been back, going against the Denver Nuggets team that's 12-2 at home. Going to be the best team that Memphis has played since Ja has returned. So looking forward to seeing, how that works out for the Grizzlies because quite frankly, it's going to be a tough one, and it's going to be a big one as well. So Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe for the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Make sure you go check that out as well. Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel, national sports streaming channel on YouTube. Thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies with me on today. On our next episode, we're going to break down what happened in this Nuggets game, as well as preview another big contest. Don't got a lot of rest around here. The Grizzlies are going to go get right on the plane after Denver and head to LA for a showdown against the streaking Los Angeles Clippers. So another big game coming up right after this one. And we appreciate you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies. Remember, we are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, I'm Damichael Cole, and we'll see you on Locked On Grizzlies.